All right, we'll get started. Sorry for a delay. Thanks everyone for being here today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your working day to be here. We are honored to be in this room in council chambers where law is passed, not only for myself, but also for the MIT students who are here for an education experience. So, like I said, I'd like to introduce today. My name is Justin Garrison. I am chair of the AIA Austin Urban Design Committee. I'm an urban designer at Lake Plato Architects, and I'm an Austin native with several planning and architecture projects here in Austin. And Natalie Rodriguez, who is over here to the left, planner, digital strategist at Sasaki Associates in Boston, recent MIT graduate, also an Austin native. Janya Littlefield, a planner, urban designer at GRAEF in Madison, also a recent grad from MIT, Austin enthusiast, researcher, and taco tourist. Matt Dugan here, Long Range Planning Division Manager at City of Austin Planning Department. There's several planning projects here in Austin, including Imagine Austin's comprehensive plan. So that's who we are. We want to know who you are. So we want to know who you are because it's important for us to understand it takes a multidisciplinary approach to small area planning and the community stakeholders it takes to make impactful decisions. So with that said, if you are the mayor or the mayor in the mayor's office, can you please raise your hand? Okay. If you are the city manager or in his office, can you please raise your hand? If you are a council member or in their office, can you please raise your hand? Awesome. If you are a board member or commissioner for the city of Austin, can you please raise your hand? Great. If you are a city staff, can you please raise your hand? Wow. If you are a design professional, architect, urban designer, planner, landscape architect, can you please raise your hand? Great. If you are AIA Austin chapter leaders, can you please raise your hand? If you are a part of the AIA Urban Design Committee, can you please raise your hand? Okay. If you are MIT students or you are in Boston listening in, can you raise your hand and say hello?
Hello!
If you are the media, can you please raise your hand? All right. And if you are the public who hasn't been addressed yet, can you please raise your hand? Awesome. So as you can see here, we have a room full of diverse backgrounds, which is a true community collaboration. So today, this is the agenda. I will talk about who we are from the perspective of the AI Austin Urban Design Committee and why we are here to set the stage. And then Danya and Natalie will get into the big ideas for the small area planning for the MIT work that they completed. And then Matt Dugan will talk about, give an update for the City of Austin small area planning. And then I'll kind of wrap up with outcomes and futures with the Q&A session. So before we get into who we are as AI Austin Urban Design Committee, I'd like to introduce briefly Wendy Dunham-Tita, who is the president of AI Austin, to say a few words.
Thank you, Justin, for not only today, but for your tireless work and inspiration. It has been a joy to see. For those of you who do not know us, the American Institute of Architects Austin chapter, also known as AIA Austin, is really the voice for architecture in this region and our community. And our scope really extends beyond the built to both the unbuilt and the built environment. We, as a professional organization, consistently strive to educate and advocate for a vibrant, diverse, inclusive, and healthy community, and also to really enhance the quality of life. And today, you will see the work of part of those efforts through everything that you are here to learn about today. Thank you so much.
So briefly, who we are as the AI Austin Urban Design Committee. Our names evolved over the year. We used to be the Austin Area Rapid Transit, but due to the change in membership to be multidisciplinary, that includes architects, landscape architects, urban designers, urban planners, developers, we have evolved to be the Urban Design Committee. And really our mission is to promote programs that teach and inform professionals and the public about design and development of quality urban environments and spaces. And briefly go through the priorities. But where we fit in AI Austin is we are the public role. We are the advocates for AIA Austin. We're kind of the face on the streets in our committee. There are other committees who are in that same sector, but that's kind of where we stand. Some things that we do locally is missing middle awareness at AIA Home Stewart, which is this weekend, by the way, if you are planning on going, where we promote the benefits of missing middle housing. We have placemaking initiatives where 2 years ago we helped promote closing down a right-of-way and make it into a public space through tactical urbanism means. We have educational opportunities where we bring in guest lecturers and speakers to hear about local things that are happening. Next month we have Spencer Cronk coming to speak at one of our luncheons. Just last week we finished a questionnaire related to urban design and planning topics that were sent out to all mayor and council member candidates that were related to planning urban design topics, which is on our website if you want to use that for upcoming elections. And something that our committee wasn't directly involved with, but members were heavily involved with, was the recent, through the Code Next Advocacy Roundtable Committee. We had members critique Code Next, give feedback, and evaluate it in ways to give meaningful impact to hopefully change the way it was written and through multiple reports. And it was successful in a way that it just provided feedback for the planning committee for the Code Next. And obviously today we are here for an academic collaboration. It's very important to AIA Austin and the committee to engage with academia to look at big picture items, but also local issues. And we want a local client when it comes to these projects. We want to engage the local experts in the community who are you guys. And we want to, through that means of academic collaboration, we can address whole areas of the city. I just want to stress that this is an academic exercise. This is hypothetical. What you're going to see today is not real. Nothing's happening, but this is a way to start a discussion to hopefully change the future of small area planning. So why are we here today? As you know, Austin's a very complex city. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. It has an outdated land development code from the 80s. It has unsuccessful neighborhood plans with strong political power that was solely on certain neighborhoods and not all neighborhoods of Austin. And laundry list of issues go on for density, sprawl, mobility, infrastructure deficits, affordability crisis. And really the task at hand for the course is, with housing demand continuously outpacing supply each year and land prices skyrocketing, the question becomes, where does all this growth go and how's it realized? It's not about individual development projects or large-scale planning. There's a missing scale that we need to address. We need to create an implementable tool for Imagine Austin's framework goals for complete communities. So a major issue is density, and how do we redefine it? It needs to be painted in a light appropriate to Austin's context. It can't continue to grow in its current development of high-rise and single-family housing. We need to better understand how density is embedded in existing neighborhoods and areas of new future growth, as well as the key to success is understanding the topologies that help shift the perception of density. And another issue is affordability. So Austin's on the brink of affordable housing crisis. A comprehensive approach to affordability is greatly needed. A missing middle can be that affordable option for all families. The denser and more housing options provide lower home prices, or at least they help maintain price increases. The right kind of density generates better quality of life and a variety of life cycles for community members through affordable housing options. Housing and communities with access to daily and weekly needs is essential to the interrelated components of household affordability. There's a framework that currently exists in Austin. It's Imagine Austin's comprehensive plan that can address these issues, and which is, as you all know, it's an aspirational vision generated goals and ideas for Austin's future over the next 30 years at both the large scale and the small scale referred to as complete communities. These aspirational communities provide context, but they need a tool to implement them. There's a desire to bring planning down to a scale that's real, flexible, and community focused. And the tool to implement this framework and change, it exists as well through the future of small area planning. It just needs to be done at the right scale. To deal with increased growing pains, the City of Austin has pursued regulations at two scales, the citywide vision and single development projects. Historically, neighborhoods plans were created in the absence of a comprehensive plan and were not completed for each neighborhood, creating stronger neighborhoods. As the city begins an effort to update this current small area planning process, there's an opportunity to reimagine this planning process by incorporating the missing scale, which is the district, to serve as a broader planning, through a broadening planning lens that establishes a complete community that bridges the gap between the existing citywide scale and the smaller planning scale. District scale planning is the optimum scale to address multiple neighborhoods and corridors that support specific community goals and values. And with that said, I'll introduce Danya and Nayeli to present their work.
Hi, thanks so much, Justin, for that introduction. So I'm Nayeli Rodriguez, and this is Danya Littlefield, and we are so happy to be here today. Before we begin, I just want to say that for me personally, I grew up in Austin. My father used to work for the city, and I used to come visit him at City Hall, so I feel really proud, as is Danya, to be back here in Austin presenting these ideas to what I still consider to be my hometown, and beginning really my career as a planner with this project, which started when we were both still students. And we're also really happy to be representing the rest of our classmates who are watching in Boston right now. Oh, Justin, I think you took the clicker with you. So thanks again for everyone for giving us your time and attention today. We're really happy to be here. So speaking of those students who are currently watching in Boston, and Danya and I began this project this way as well. This was our team. We had 2 professors and 15 planners in training, and since then 2 of us are no longer in training. Danya and I have left the cozy confines of MIT, and now we're out in the world speaking to all of you. And this project started out as a studio where our brief was to work with the local Austin Institute of Architects to critique and look for opportunities within Code Next through the lens of design. And that was a way of making recommendations and also pushing us to think of ways that the code could work better for the city and how we could think through it as planners. And right away, our brief was to think through missing middle housing. So what we did in order to pursue that was come here for about 10 days in January. We did site visits in 2 different locations, which we felt represented 2 very diverse communities and different urban conditions within Austin. So one was South First Street and the other was in Northeast Austin. So we did over 30 stakeholder interviews. We had an initial charrette design process with our client AIA, and we then workshopped those ideas over the course of 24 weeks with regular check-ins with the client to come up with our ending proposals. And while we began with this scope that focused on missing middle housing and how we could push our study of housing typologies, very quickly we began to broaden that scope to be a conversation more about complete communities. We were interested in how the addition of new housing stock could impact the city beyond just the question of affordable housing, because even if you add more housing to a city that's rapidly growing like Austin, you still have outstanding concerns about how that development is going to impact affordability, transportation, the environment, and the existing cultural amenities and communities that are already existing here. So we wanted to challenge ourselves and be a bit more ambitious, take on the question of complete communities more comprehensively. And we synthesized that work into 4 major themes. So those themes were adding density through zoning, increasing connectivity, harnessing environmental systems, and reprogramming community spaces. So for us, thinking through the question of complete communities in a comprehensive way not only meant that we had to expand our scope beyond just housing, but it also meant that we needed to start thinking through how these ideas would be implemented in a more comprehensive way. And what I mean by that is that we really wanted to think about recommendations we could make to the city about how the different disciplines and teams that already exist here in Austin could be working together in a more collaborative and cross-functional way. And you'll see that reflected in the structure and the style of our recommendations, which often layer cross-functional approaches and suggest collaborations between, for example, landscape and transportation departments or community organizations and outside consultants. We really see that there's an opportunity and an obligation to work better together, and that's why we structured our proposals in the way that we did.
So before we get into our proposals, I'm going to address the question, what is small area planning? And as Justin introduced, we really feel that small area planning can be this intermediate scale in between a full, 50,000 feet view of the city, large city plan, and a single development or how, code falls on the parcel. And so we think about small area plans as neighborhood plans, district plans, or corridor plans. And again, the benefit of this type of intermediate scale is that the community can communicate back up to the city more easily about how the specific conditions in a particular area affect that whole city vision, and the city vision can be more easily translated down to the community scale. So in the bottom diagram, you see just sort of a representation of that type of middle scale happening. And we saw time and time again as we investigated our sites where that would be useful. And we'll go into that as we continue here. Our study site, South First Street, is a 9-mile long corridor in total. And the Northeast Austin site, which is the neighborhoods around the Colony Park development, is 9.4 square miles. These are pretty large areas to be using as planning areas. But we found that allowed us to think about what a district is in sort of a different way and really start to reconcile community level concerns with the big vision of Imagine Austin. And so as we started to investigate these sites further, we wanted to look in what has Austin already done. As Justin mentioned at the beginning, the neighborhood plans in Austin, they're a much smaller scale than the district we were looking at. You can see South First, they're continuing well beyond the edge of what has been planned through neighborhood planning. And the Northeast Austin site extends off the page, also hasn't been planned through the neighborhood planning process. And these neighborhood plans are also clustered towards the center of the city. And then also understanding where these sites fall in the context of Imagine Austin and the context of Austin in Motion and the corridor improvement projects. So South First Street in Imagine Austin is a activity corridor, and the Northeast Austin site that we looked at does contain some activity centers. And however, the corridor improvement program, that doesn't directly translate to the corridor improvement program. South First Street is not included in that planning effort. And so we felt both that we wanted to understand what Austin has done in relationship to these areas that we were looking at, and also how their plans were talking together or not talking together about sort of this scale of planning. So I'll break down how we started to frame to develop a framework for our site. For South First Street, we really wanted to look, as we traveled along it, it changes a lot as you go from the center of the city all the way down to Mary Morrissey Wright Park. And we first noticed the stark contrast between the area north of Ben White and south of Ben White, looked at all the neighborhood plans and where they end, and then how the development pattern changes, especially south of William Cannon. And then we developed a framework that talks about connectivity, activity nodes along this corridor, and then in the neighborhood surrounding, and then also looked at the way natural, or rather environmental systems intersect with the corridor, streams and watersheds, and developed a framework based on that. In Northeast Austin, it's a much different type of development. We use a layered approach to make our framework in this area, layering the open space network that exists, other environmental factors, and the different types of urban form. You can see in that little pink diagram on the left, that large areas in this space are not yet developed, and so a lot of the recommendations that we ended up making were about connection. And so as we move towards a framework for Northeast Austin, we also thought about scales from that district scale all the way down to a parcel scale. The resulting district scale plans are different because the two districts are different. But you can see that they were the result of sort of a conceptual framework in which we were locating our recommendations. So as we moved from those district scale frameworks, we moved into big ideas for small area planning in Austin and developed our handbook for complete communities. As Nayeli mentioned, the 4 themes that we synthesized that idea of a complete community into, and so those 4 themes became 4 chapters of our handbook, sitting right there. And we have 8 big ideas that fall within those chapters. I just wanted to note here, we have so much content in this handbook that we aren't able to present. So I encourage you to check out the complete document if you're interested in following up on this work. And we'll go through each of the big ideas now.
Right, so the first theme that we took on was adding density through zoning, which related to the original brief that we had to think about missing middle and adding housing stock to Austin's current housing. And so this idea responded to what was our initial brief and also this question about how Austin is going to accommodate more density. The first big idea that we had that's under this theme is the idea of floating zoning. And floating zoning is an idea of introducing a little bit more incremental process and open-endedness into the process of zoning, which is normally a pretty static and rigid regulation that falls onto the entire city in sort of a blanket way. We wanted to create the opportunity for cities to, or communities, excuse me, to incorporate more local context and decision-making process into what kind of density they were able to accommodate. And that translates into this regulatory process that can be either citizen or city initiated. And cities can, or communities can determine whether they are able and ready to include more density into their localities and change the zoning configurations that fall into those communities based on incremental changes that happen over time. The second big idea in this theme is the concept of additional density units. So ADUs are already very popular in Austin thanks to the Alley Flat initiative and other trends that we've already seen across the city, but we wanted to expand our understanding of ADUs to not only be about residential units, but also commercial, cultural, and open space units. So the idea here is to take the concept of ADUs and expand it not only to include other activities besides just housing, but also to think through what ADUs can look like when they are joined together as a network and create off-center nodes and corridors of activity that unburden the existing street grid and can also work together so that there's connectivity through neighborhoods and between small-scale commercial and residential activities.
And so the next theme is increasing connectivity. When we talk about increasing density in Austin, especially in existing neighborhoods, but even in yet to be developed neighborhoods, something we heard time and time again when we were here is concerns about infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure and traffic. And I think that everyone would agree that it's important to think about development and transportation in tandem so that the density that Austin is, the growth in density that Austin is experiencing remains accessible to all. And so the first big idea within that topic is mobility. And what we did to flesh out our understanding of what this could mean for Austin is we developed a hybrid classification of the street network that looks at the relationship between the roadways and the development that's adjacent. We also then thought about how this can be applied to both the different types of prototype sites. So on the left of the screen, you see the sort of at the top, an existing neighborhood formation in Northeast Austin where it's a disconnected neighborhood with an entrance and an exit to the community. And then thinking about how a street hierarchy can inform better connection over time and different types of access to that neighborhood, and encourage that type of conversation between development and transportation to be happening as we think about growth. And on the right side, we see a kind of a different scale of this application. We see sort of a pedestrian scale and how along the historic part of South First, very close to downtown Austin, and thinking about how the existing pedestrian network is perhaps unsafe in different parts of this corridor, and needs to be thought about as a network of accessibility as well. The next big idea is about anticipating transit, and we thought through how Austin could set up sort of the big moves that would make continued growth feasible. And this is transit-oriented development approach, and we looked at different prototype sites in the districts to sort of flesh out what this might look like. This particular example is a pedestrian-friendly but larger-scale development happening at the Ben White and South First intersection with actually a covered highway there so that it becomes a walkable district. But I encourage you to look at the other ideas about that we've proposed about this topic as well in the handbook. So the next big theme, and I know we're going kind of fast and furious here, but that's because we have a lot of ideas that we're really excited to get through. So the next big theme is about addressing environmental systems. And this is important in the overall picture of how Austin's going to accommodate this new growth and development, because as we add to the housing stock, as we create more built areas and new transportation networks that are connecting those areas, we're covering over more space that's currently performing really important ecological and social functions. So that means that the existing parks, open spaces, and green spaces that currently absorb excess runoff, say in record-breaking storms, but that also absorb the recreational and social functions of the surrounding neighborhoods, are going to become overdrawn and under more pressure to absorb both the water and also the recreational activity that people rely on them for. So in this section, we wanted to think through how a networked, more strategic approach to landscape and green infrastructure can support development, support recreation, and also support ecological functions. And the way that we thought about doing that was creating a system of incentives and recommendations that prioritize public benefit, networks, connectivity, and performance of landscape, as opposed to a parcel by parcel spot approach to minimum pervious surface requirements, minimum plantings, thinking through more how can we create a network strategy that works with environmental systems, the creek systems, for example, what's already in place, and to create more of a strategic approach that connects environmental systems to make them more performative, and then can be layered with alternative transportation. So let's think about how areas around a creek, for example, can be landscaped and thought through and connected with public transportation, with alternative bike and walking trails, so that an area which is now creating risk of flooding to the adjacent parcels becomes a public amenity and a place where people can walk, bike, take some pressure off the existing infrastructure systems, and also create a vibrant public amenity. And the next big idea in this section is about climate responsive urban design. So with the arrival of so much more development and built areas within Austin, it's an obligation, but also an opportunity to think through what kind of development we want to promote and how that development could be adhering to certain design principles or guidelines that will help prepare Austin to be climate ready and offset some of the urban heat island effects, be really working with the street grid, with parks, with vegetation, and even down to how specific houses can be retrofitted or designed to be more climate ready. And so we've talked about increasing density incrementally. We've talked about the infrastructure that type of density depends on, and we've talked about the ecological functions that also support those aspects of complete communities. But we haven't yet talked about people and the social aspect of Austin. And so these next two big ideas start to delve into how the social and human network intersects with these big ideas. First, we want to talk about First, I want to talk about reprogramming, nurturing Austin's cultural amenities. Austin is famous for its network of cultural amenities, for its, wonderful places to see music and art, and for all the different sort of cultural centers that it has. We also know that these amenities are not evenly blanketed around the city and are not evenly accessible to all neighborhoods. And often, especially outside of the downtown neighborhoods, don't work together as a network. So we thought about, especially in the areas we were looking at, knitting together a cultural network through some innovative ways. And we talked about layering approaches, and I think this is a perfect example. On the left, these diagrams are showing a transit stop that incorporates green infrastructure and an attitude towards accessibility that is also located with placemaking. And so this becomes sort of a multifaceted node that does require that interdisciplinary work to happen to make it a really great space in Austin. And on the right, we're looking at, and we know that this happens. We're in neighborhoods where the community center is the school, and thinking about how that type of community space can be more visible and transparent to the community around is another important thing to think through, so that these places can work together and also become a network that even in a more suburban typology can connect with each other and bring that cultural network in Austin to the forefront of communities, no matter where they are. And our last big idea is about retrofitting aging suburban centers. One of the things we realized is that these social spaces, there's not always built-in infrastructure for where they're going to go. And thinking about growth in Austin, and thinking about sort of the pressure on different spaces, we thought about some of the big parking lots in Austin and some of the types of building and development that are becoming more and more outdated as time goes on. Thinking forward to a phased plan for developing community spaces in big parking lots. Pictured on the right is the Delco Center in Northeast Austin, which has an enormous parking lot, and how these can become vibrant community spaces as well. So our last kind of point that we want to make to everyone, based on all of these recommendations, is an understanding that none of these recommendations are as meaningful if we don't understand how community engagement is both informing and critiquing them as we go through a process of implementation. So this is something that I can really relate to, being from Austin myself, is that a lot of people that we spoke to have a consciousness and sometimes an anxiety about how Austin is going to grow from a small town that we all love to a big city, and what kind of unknown changes that's going to bring. So if we're going to foster the kind of complete communities that we envision that are ambitious and vibrant and continue to be welcoming places for the people who are here and the people who are going to be arriving, while continuing this trajectory of growth that Austin is currently on, we should be more ambitious and innovative, not only in the types of plans that we're making, but also in how we're conceiving of those plans and how communities are brought into the process of developing those plans so that everybody's needs are being met. So we made a firm commitment to this during our short time in Austin. We put flyers out of the city, in addition to all the stakeholders that we spoke to, from people that we met and encountered. We also encouraged people to contact us with their opinions, with their questions, with their critiques of what was currently going on. And we really considered that in our development of these proposals. We really saw design as a way to critique and also to question plans, but we saw the role of these community members as crucial to that process because public buy-in will be more essential when it comes to actually bringing these plans to life and implementing them. And that public buy-in not only has to happen at the municipal government level, but it also needs to happen from the bottom up and from communities giving their feedback. So in our handbook, we not only include these recommendations, we also, for every single idea that we propose ideas that we hope are innovative and a little bit creative for how to communicate these ideas to individual communities based on the feedback that we got. And
these recommendations, they range from stuff that's already being done at a smaller scale in Austin to things that are being creatively done in other cities that Austin could have a look at and see if it's right when these ideas, start to play out in the public eye. So in conclusion, I just want to wrap this up by saying that, a lot of people have this anxiety about how Austin's going to grow, but even if we accept that it is going to grow, how we grow and how we get there is an important question, and it's one that we considered very carefully and that's important and close to our hearts. I think that engagement is an important part of that process. Like we mentioned, it's going to determine whether Austin as a community, stagnates or becomes, increasingly more equitable, more sustainable, more innovative, and just enhances all the things that we already love about this place. So the vision that we have of a complete community that's cohesive, that's collaborative and complete will continue to improve the quality of life for residents, for workers, and for visitors to the city, visitors who maybe are coming back after a very long time and wish they still lived here. We want to make sure that it's a destination and continues to be a destination for people, for local commerce, for local organizations. We want to make sure that Austin is prepared, and we feel that we have provided some recommendations of how Austin can be prepared for challenges like affordability, for challenges like climate readiness, transportation, and cultural diversity, and also how Austin can meaningfully involve its citizens in decision-making for a future that we can all be happy about and look forward to. So those are our recommendations. Thanks again so much to everybody for giving us your time and the space to present them to you. I think we're going to hand it over to Matt for a bit of a more local comment, and then we'll be here afterwards and this weekend to speak more to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. So before Matt comes up, just want to reiterate that you saw a lot today. That was a lot of information. But again, want to thank the students who are also on the phone and from Boston. I'm going to give them another round of applause. That was amazing for the amount of work they've done. And also, there's no answers here. This is inspiration for you guys to think about the future of smart area planning in Austin. These are high-level ideas, so we just want to inspire you guys and to open up here for Matt Dugan to talk about what's happening with smart area planning in the city of Austin.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Natalie and Danya. I'm just curious. I feel like I didn't go to school too long ago, but does anybody's school projects look anything like that? Just really, really good stuff. So I'm Matt Dugan with the city's planning and zoning department. I'm with the city about 9 years. And so I'm going to talk to y'all about what we're thinking about for the future of small area planning from the planning and zoning department. So I'll talk to you a little bit about our background, the direction we're given, our staff recommendation, and then what we're looking at for the first year for our potential work program. So kind of a high level, very simplistic look at our City of Austin policy framework. We've got Imagine Austin, which is a citywide comprehensive plan, looking at how we grow and develop beautification for the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. Small area plans, which include neighborhood plans, corridor plans, and TOD plans are included as attachments to the comprehensive plan, along with other citywide master plans. And then below that's kind of our tools for how we actually move this stuff forward, how the city spends money, our CIP program, how the city regulates growth, our land development code, and then partnerships with folks like AIA. And also just a shout out to AIA. I mean, this is awesome, there's many people here. Having groups and organizations like y'all, you would not believe how helpful it is for us to try and move stuff forward in this city. So thank you for your support. So small area plans, the purpose, some of the things we're trying to do with these is create complete communities, take this idea that came to us from our Imagine Austin Centers Advisory Task Force, actually get those on the ground. Plan for growth, we're looking at accommodating an additional 750,000 people and an additional 300,000 jobs over the next 30 years. That was our city remark for Ryan Robinson's, his projection when we kicked off the project. And believe it or not, that's actually a conservative projection. Another one is to give community a voice for what happens, and then provide greater predictability for what happens on the ground. This is something everybody wants. We keep hearing about. One thing I'd like to point out is the difference between planning and implementation. So your plan, that's really your vision, your policies, your actions, your map, what you want to do, and then implementation is, okay, this is actually how we're going to do it. These are the decisions we're going to make to try and actually implement this stuff so that we can see those plans that we come up with get done and get put on the ground. So in Austin, we actually have a very rich history of planning. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it is ugly. So in '79, we had a Austin Tomorrow comp plan. There was an effort in the '80s to update that plan. It failed on third and final reading. I wasn't here for that, but my understanding is the mayor, the business community, the residents got together and say, okay, that was really ugly, never do that again. So the city shifted, started doing neighborhood plans in the late '90s. And we've done about 30 of those neighborhood plans or combined neighborhood planning areas. Excuse me. And over the last decade, we've also done 8 specialized urban design plans. Those are master plans, stationary plans, like East Riverside Corridor Plan. And then in June 2012, the city adopted the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. And then we've had 3 small area plans adopted since then, the last one being North Shoal Creek. And then we had a planning audit done in 2016. Took a look at the neighborhood planning program and found several deficiencies in the planning process. So with that, we kind of have, we know it's time to go and look in a new direction for our small area plans. And then last year, September of 2017, Council gave us a resolution to provide additional direction for where we should go. Told us to focus our planning efforts around Imagine Austin centers and corridors to also try and leverage the mobility bond improvements and other infrastructure improvements, as well as housing. So we've done a lot of work on this, some analysis. We had an internal multi-departmental co-creation team, met with our staff and our partner departments, did a survey, had an internal design challenge, and then worked with Planning Commission and the Small Area Plan Joint Committee of Planning Commission and the Zoning and Planning Commission to try and come up with our recommendation. So real quick, we've done some analysis. Took a look at a number of different things. One of the things we did that was pretty cool is we, working with our city demographer, built a prototype complete community assessment tool to try and take a look at what would be, what areas in town had access and proximity to 4 things, which were a school, a grocery store, a park, and a high-frequency transit stop. I think one of the things that makes it so tough about planning in the city is a lot of the stuff people want is not actually within our zone of control. We can do certain things about some things, but a lot of things we have no control over. But people look to us to solve those problems. And just to kind of build on that one, we went through Imagine Austin. We did all these stakeholder interviews, and one of them was with the superintendent of Del Valle Independent School District. Del Valle is actually not a jurisdiction, but he would get calls for people saying, "Hey, I've got a pothole in my street. Come fix it." I was like, "Well, nothing to do with the streets. I'm the school district." So I think it kind of goes, people don't distinguish the difference between city, school district, healthcare district, community college, all that stuff. They just pay their property tax to one place, and they think we all work together seamlessly, and it's a lot more difficult than that. Okay. So what we did was a survey to our external stakeholders. We sent this to all the folks in the community registry, got back some of their input on what they would like to see for the future of small area planning. A couple things that were interesting is it looked like about 6 to 12 months seemed to be kind of the sweet spot for the length of a public process and a willingness to participate. But after 12 months, it really, really dropped off. And then most people really wanted to participate and engage through online surveys. So it's just really helpful to hear from folks what works for them, what doesn't work for them. So what we came up with were what we're calling 3 planning products for the future of small area planning. The first is our Imagine Austin Centers and Corridors plans. These will be full service plans along the centers and corridors in Imagine Austin. These will be prioritized based on susceptibility to change, the ability to leverage mobility bond investments and other factors. And these plans would typically include a future land use map and be adopted as attachments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. The second product line is what we're calling our complete community planning or complete community interventions. These will be focused on immediate intervention and investments to support creation of places where residents can meet all their needs without needing to rely on a vehicle. These plans would be prioritized based on a citywide complete community assessment. And these plans will be more limited in scope than a center or a corridor plan, and most likely not be adopted as an attachment. So it's kind of a less of a traditional planning process and more of a try and go out and do something and move the needle on some issue. And then the third product line is the special studies and planning category, and this includes bigger citywide plans, special purpose area planning that can be customized to a particular need. An example of that would be the South Shore Central Waterfront plan. So we look at our centers and corridors. The map shows kind of how we started getting at this prioritization. So we did our complete community assessment, try to figure out which areas we thought needed more help than others. Then we had our centers and corridors put on the map. Then we overlaid that with areas that were getting funding for the 2016 mobility bond, and then also areas that had high frequency transit stops, or transit lines. So we really started seeing some things pop off the map. One thing too, just to kind of manage expectations, is we'd probably need about 50 to 100 plans in order to adequately plan for all of the Imagine Austin centers and corridors. But based on the direction from the council resolution, we're going to recommend focusing initially on particular corridors that can leverage the anticipated mobility investments. We think these new plans will take about 18 months to complete, and with existing staff, we could probably do about 1 to 2 of these plans per year. So the first few we do will definitely be pilot processes. We can learn from what we're doing, so they might actually take a little bit longer than that time frame. Kind of thinking of it as like we kind of know what we want to do. Once we get out there, we'll really know what we want to do, and try and work with the community for a better process. So we're looking at, for our year 1 work program, is doing corridor plans for North Lamar. After that, we're looking at Tech Ridge to US 183, and then another one for South Pleasant Valley from about East Riverside on down to William Cannon. So these corridors provide geographic balance and provide 2 fairly distinct settings in which we can try out a new small area planning approach. And that is all I had. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So before I quickly wrap up, there was actually a group of people I want to forgot to call out to raise their hand. With recent elections coming up, can the candidates who are not elected to date but are running for mayor or council member, can you please raise your hand? Great. Awesome. All right, so to wrap up here, outcomes of the work, as you can see here, the students had an incredible amount of work. We went through high level. So please, if you could go to our website, and if you want to see more in detail and actually study the body of work, and there's a lot of written text in here that has a lot of great information. It's on our website. And so our body of work is behind me as well. So at the end of, after the Q&A, the students will come up, and if you want to come read the boards and more information, ask them questions one-on-one, they will be standing up here for that. So we had the final presentation when their studio wrapped up in June at AIA Austin. Several of you were there as well. So thanks again for coming back if you were there. Really appreciate it. And we had council members there. We had city staff, local professionals, residents, students, that were, again, a larger crowd today, but still the same amount, multidisciplinary approach. We had a panel at AIA Summer Conference on this topic, and we plan on presenting at TXA, the Texas Society of Architects Convention in Fort Worth, this body of work again to a broader audience in Fort Worth. And so far the work has been well received. So the future of this work, as Code Next, as you all know, has been rejected. So right now is the ideal time for the future of small area planning. We need to balance the bottom up and top down needs of the city. It's time to holistically combine all the large scale planning efforts and the transit regional planning and local efforts that are happening from a mobility standpoint. And we need to engage the community at a scale that's achievable. And so the 3 takeaways I hope you leave today is we need to revamp small area planning, we need to enhance community engagement efforts, and we need to rethink consultant stakeholder collaboration, that maybe there's a new RFP that's written to engage better consultants moving forward. And again, this is our website. You can download our body of work. This lecture today will be on our website. Either it's up there now or it will be by the end of today. So all of this work is open to the public and for you to view. And before we end, I just want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the mayor's office, John Michael Cortez, for helping out with this body of work. I want to thank the council members who have been a part of this. It's hard to see everyone's faces, but I know I see Ora Houston in the background. Thanks for coming in June, and other council members who are here. Thanks to AIA leadership for being a part of this effort. Thanks for MIT students for this incredible amount of work. And thanks for everyone for letting us, thanks for the city for letting us be in this room. It's very aspirational to be here today. And with that said, I'm going to open up a Q&A. I'm going to invite the students and Matt Dugan up too to answer some Q&As and open up to you guys. So thanks again. Just raise your hand and I can bring you the mic.
Any questions? Nothing? Oh, okay, great. Yes. Hello. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. We'll call on you next. Don't worry. I didn't see your name.
Hi. Thank y'all. This was really well done and appreciated. I have asked a lot of the questions I'm going to ask you of staff recently, but I noticed a lot of negative comments about neighborhood plans in your presentation. And then I also saw that there was nothing about neighborhoods in small area planning. So my question is the idea to knit the neighborhood plans into the small area planning, or are we getting rid of neighborhood planning? Because it's very unclear to me, at least at this point. And I'm Karen McGraw, architect and planning commissioner.
I can just say one thing about the way we talked about it in our work, and then Matt, I'm sure you have a response, but our sites, as you saw, are much bigger than the neighborhood plans that have been created in Austin, and we found a lot of value in looking at that scale, which is part of what we were sharing with you today. I didn't mean to, we didn't mean to appear negative about the plans that already exist, but just advocate for a different scale and talk about sort of the things that can be uncovered with this larger scale than the neighborhood plans, and comment on sort of, where those plans end. There are a lot of areas that don't have neighborhood plans that are really close to and integrated with physically places that have been planned for.
I can actually add to that too as well. I think some reason behind looking at the neighborhood plans in a different lens was the fact that they are neighborhood plans that are kind of insular looking, and the fact that they have a boundary and they're focused on that boundary. And the idea of that the missing scale that we're addressing today is a district. So it's not one neighborhood, it's a community of neighborhoods that address a district, because each neighborhood might have its unique identity, which is perfectly ideal for neighborhoods to have that, but also those neighborhoods need to engage other neighborhoods. Just because a road divides you doesn't mean the community, you don't walk across that street and engage the other neighbors. So it's really about that larger district scale and the community scale that creates those.
What I would say is, from the city perspective, is neighborhood plans are adopted by council. So the only way for a neighborhood plan to change would be for council to take action on that neighborhood plan. I think what we're looking for moving forward with redesigning kind of a new small area planning process is those 3 planning products we've come up with: the centers and corridors plans, the community interventions, or the special study areas, but that we would not offer kind of a traditional neighborhood plan moving forward.
Another question?
Oh, I think she had one there.
Thank you. Can you back up one slide to the 3 takeaways? So you have a rethink consultant stakeholder collaboration, and I just wanted you to kind of flesh that out, what you mean by that, because I'm not asking you to comment on a certain group that shall not be named, but I just mean, is there something that I'm missing there? What do you mean by rethink consultant stakeholder collaboration?
I think that goes back to that diagram at the beginning that you guys did for that. The collaboration is a multidisciplinary approach to this effort. It's not, because the city's planning staff, there's a certain amount of people that can do this effort, and they need to engage urban designers and planners and architects and landscape architects and environmentalists, ecologists, city mobility planners, ways that holistically look at small area planning, and not ways that I think in the past Matt might be able to talk more about the consultants who might have worked on it, or another committee member can come in and talk about that. But from my perspective, the holistic vision of the consultants need to be, and it really goes to kind of the RFP as well, and the way that we can rethink the way they're written that attract consultants to actually want to work with the city. Because the most impactful projects are with ones that have consultants in the city working together, and it's not city only or consultants only. It's the collaboration that has that broad breadth of information.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think we came into this process, independent almost of the Code Next process that had already been underway, and we weren't involved in, obviously selection of, any of the consultants that might have come on board for that or any other city processes. We're just, working sort of on a parallel, process that concerned our project. But this is an opportunity now that we've put some of these ideas out here and spent some time thinking about them, hopefully in a provocative way, so that in the future and going forward, some of these things can play a role in how maybe future consultants or groups might be vetted, the types of questions that might want to be asked of those groups, and how their ideas could maybe be critiqued with some of our questions in mind going forward.
Thank you. I'm Eleanor McKinney, landscape architect, and I think it's going to, if that is a goal, then it's going to be important to have some of these disciplines be able to break out of the box that might be placed on what the city may think that their services are. I know as a landscape architect, we are frequently looked at as, okay, what are you going to do? Plant some trees along the roadway, and that's about it, rather than what we've been trained to do, which is to look at the context of an area and do the urban planning that's being proposed here. So it has to go back in the RFQ to what do you think those roles, how do you think you can best utilize the consultants to be able to engage with the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie.
I agree.
Question over here. Yeah.
Justin's getting his work out today. He's getting his steps in.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, I'm Victoria. Towards the beginning of your presentation, one of the ideas was floating zoning.
Mm-hmm.
That's a new concept to me, and I was hoping you could walk through that in a little more detail. What are actually the mechanics of that? Who's involved? What is the product of that? And the time frame. I'm just interested in hearing more.
What is more about floating zoning? Sure. I don't want to get too in the weeds, because I think zoning and regulation can be a sort of dense process. And so in our sort of schematic diagram about how that works, we wanted to stay a little bit high level and invite people to inform themselves more through the literature that's online. But I think we wanted to investigate a process that would enable zoning to be more flexible over time, and allow for smaller districts to, I guess, apply and have different zoning conditions fall on them if by a process of local decision making they decide that they want to pursue more dense or differently configured zoning. It's actually not a new process, but just sort of it's a new take on an existing process of having overlay or floating districts, which I know is something Austin is trying to streamline. But thinking about how overlay districts aren't complexifying the process, but introducing more flexibility and agility into what can often become somewhat calcified zoning recommendations that blanket across the city and say, well, zoning for this entire large area is one thing. We wanted to create that kind of flexibility and also open-endedness into the process. So maybe a small area that is already by nature of citizen action or small initiatives already beginning to densify and build more. We don't want to stall that process if that's what's right for that community. We want to make it a more streamlined process so that communities can grow at the pace that they feel they can accommodate. And I think that there are still things to be thought through in the implementation of how that works specifically with what's on the books in Austin right now. It's more thinking about a new process for how zoning can work than specifically currently drawing new boundaries on the map, which we did not get to the, I guess, like granular detail of.
I'll just make one additional comment. So floating zoning isn't mapped. It's a conditionally applied thing. So rather than an overlay that says everything in this area, has a certain condition, it's a more fine-grained, okay, if a community or the city is like, oh, this set of conditions are happening here, this existing regulatory framework could come down in this area.
I think another way to think of that concept is, right now, you can either be in compliance with an existing zoning condition, or you can be asking for kind of spot by spot exceptions to that zoning. But there's some place to meet in the middle where if you feel that a lot of exceptions are appropriate or being asked for or in the benefit of a specific area, that instead of having to go and ask for individual exceptions to the zoning with every new development, just make it more easy and streamlined to accept that change is happening in that area and kind of bring it along in the process. Does that make sense? Someone?
Question?
Katie Coyne, Environmental Commissioner, and I lead the Urban Ecology Studio at Asakura Robinson. So I have a question, and maybe this is just because I haven't seen the handbook and I've only seen your presentation about the two specific places that you did this work, but do you see a benefit in creating metrics or standards across the board for all small area plans to meet, and or creating design guidelines that can be differentially applied across small area plans? I'm specifically asking because we're redoing our climate action plan. We've talked about doing district scale climate metrics. We, in Code Next, talked about functional green as an opportunity at a site scale, but also saw a lot of opportunity at a district scale. So I kind of asked two questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's fine. Thanks. I love that question because I completely understand that, it's hard to talk about performative landscapes and performative, green infrastructure without trying to quantify that or create metrics. I think here's an interesting place to bring in the differentiation between metrics and goals. So if you're seeking to implement green infrastructure or try to think through your open space and green space strategy in a more networked way, you don't necessarily have to require certain metrics to be met, but you can set ambitious goals and then create incentives or guidelines for how people who are hoping to interact with that system would try to reach those goals. So one of the goals that we talked about was having connectivity and performance be thought through. So that's going to be different for every creek system and for every community. There's no way to, just like with zoning, have that fall in a uniform blanket way across the entire city. But if a community says it's really important to us that we implement new flood protections, and we're willing to negotiate with private landowners and with private businesses to try to come up with a solution that will allow us to create a public amenity that protects us from floods, and that also, is connective and brings in new transportation options. You can say that's a goal, and if you're helping us to achieve that goal, then here are all the incentives that you can benefit from, and here are all the ways that we're going to help you do that. It doesn't have to be quantified, but it's about having a vision and encouraging people to help you pursue that vision. I think that metrics are difficult, certainly for planners who aren't, we're not civil engineers, we're not landscape architects by trade. It's hard to quantify unless you have that specialty in a local context, but you can place a premium on, is your landscape performing? Is it connective? Is it strategically falling into our vision? And that's what we want to encourage you to do.
Question?
I got you. I hear you. I'll repeat it. Yeah, it's fine.
Because I can't keep my train of thought when I hold on. The first part of the question, this might be answered in the report, is have y'all made an effort to define what a corridor is? Because that's been a real bugaboo for Imagine Austin.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about that, especially obviously with South First Street. I think that AIA Austin helped us select these sites or assign them to us, really. And it was much longer than we were thinking, and we found a lot of value in looking at how this one spine connects so many different types of communities. And I think that it's a limitation to corridor planning if you say like, oh, we're only going to plan up to Ben White or something like that, because that's, what we all think of when we think of South First Street, or Olding to William Cannon or something like that. Looking at the whole thing together, we found really helpful. But there's the other sort of dimension, which is how far away from the corridor do you look? As you can imagine, it was really difficult for us to conceive of every neighborhood, like extending, how many blocks, how many, away from South First Street, for example. I guess I would say that we looked at neighborhood plans as existing neighborhood plans as potential boundaries. We looked at streams as sort of natural boundaries. We looked at the other big corridors. There's Lamar and Congress. So at some point, maybe there's like a gray gradient between them where the corridor kind of like becomes actually the Lamar corridor, or actually it's through the neighborhood, or actually the Congress corridor. So the answer is no answer. I think it takes some planning for the plan, and some engagement for the plan to think about. And that's, we broke down like this in those diagrammatic ways our sites. What is our framework for what that looks like? That was a huge part of our work, was just figuring out what the area is and how it made sense to break down a district scale like that. It was really rewarding though. So I think doing that pre-planning and pre-engagement to define those areas is, I see a lot of value in it, and I hope that Austin will too, and consider that type of process when, looking forward towards corridor plans.
And just to follow, because you're starting to answer my second part of my question,
right,
which is, do you see these two, what your work on the corridor versus your work in your Colony Park, do you see those as essentially the same planning effort, or are these overlays where a larger planning, small planning area could actually overlay with a corridor planning area with different results?
I mean, to be clear, the two areas that we looked at were supposed to be kind of prototypes and just exercises, and we wanted to make sure that we looked at different geometries. So it's different to look at a long, skinny patch versus, a more like focused, like kind of like spot field condition. And we wanted to make sure that, ideas that we came up with in both of those conditions, which are also very diverse, different communities, that we weren't just, coming up with things that would not make any sense in a different context. And so that was part of the reason why we looked at those two places. We aren't specifically advocating that those two places become actual small area plans.
I think it'd be great.
Maybe that's not for us to say, because we don't know what other small area plans might currently be, in the process of development. But those they did work as small areas. They don't have to be small areas. Another thing, just to get back to your previous question about corridor planning, is that maybe, one of the things that we looked at, because we started to look at South First, and then people are like, oh, we all are looking all the way down there. That's like 9 miles. It's maybe important to think not only of corridors as having a specific beginning and end, but extending in both directions. And maybe your planning effort begins to peter out at some point. But when you're making a long-term plan, think about how that corridor is going to extend and grow longer over time, and incorporating that thinking into the original, the early stage plans that you're making.
One other point that I was just thinking about, if a corridor plan only looks at transportation and the roadway, then it's not an efficient use of planning time. And thank you. And that, I guess, is, it has to get wider then, and it has to start to bring in these other types of themes and concerns. So I think that is what you're getting at. It's not a corridor running through a small area. It is a small area. It is a small area, and that's wider than the road.
Another question?
Hi, I'm Megan Scornia. I work with Asaka Robinson's Small Area Planning Studio. First off, I wanted to say I really like the way you're dancing around the question of boundaries. I think it really, neighborhood plans with their strong boundaries really do kind of force that insular thinking that you were talking about. My question relates to actual boundaries, unfortunately. Do you anticipate out of the small area planning process there being specific zoning changes on like a parcel by parcel level, or is it going to be more broader recommendations for an area? What are you thinking there? I guess that question's more for Matt.
Yes, so that'd be yes. So for a center or corridor plan, most likely it would include a future land use map, and then with that we would assign what we thought would be appropriate zoning districts to implement that future land use map. So, it's kind of like very simply, it's like you got your vision, then you got your future land use category. Basically, how do you geographically put that vision on an area of ground, and then your implementation, your zoning district to achieve those specific dimensional standards and use standards for that land use category. But yeah, ours would have land use and recommended zoning.
Question back here.
Hello, Todd Shaw with the Planning Commission. So, in working through Code Next with the Planning Commission, the most contentious area was, not along the corridor, but how that kind of transition zone into the single-family neighborhoods. And we haven't talked a lot about compatibility, but both Council and the Planning Commission, I know, ZAP spent a lot of time on that issue. We had joint committees, and to me, that really, and you look at kind of the amount of the distance between, the urbanist and the folks in the neighborhood is that's where we need to meet and have discussions and build trust. And I didn't know if you talked anything or studied at all about compatibility standards between new growth and old established neighborhoods, because that's where it really gets contentious.
I don't think we recommended something that directly gets to what you're asking about. And a lot of the in the Northeast Austin site that we were looking at, there's a lot of undeveloped land. That is different than what you're talking about. So a lot of our recommendations about growth were in that context. In sort of the more the northern part of South First Street, talking to stakeholders there, it's immediately apparent that sort of transitions from bigger density is a very present issue and concern for people who live in like the Bowling Creek neighborhood, for example. That transition was not something we heard about it a lot. It doesn't appear in one of our big ideas, but yeah, I guess.
We got to that less when it came to urban built forms, which I think we have a lot of big ideas, and pulling from those big ideas, depending on the context, the additional density units and floating zoning is more applicable to some neighborhoods than others. So that's how we address that in a bigger picture way. Green infrastructure is one area that we actually did think about local context and compatibility, because in some places it makes sense to think through green infrastructure as a series of interconnected small patches. And in some areas, in order to offset, larger density and larger buildings that will be developed, it makes sense to have like larger green space networks that are at a different scale. So in that section, we did talk about compatibility, and you can kind of extrapolate from the green infrastructure recommendations that are suggested for different types of neighborhoods and contexts, what kind of development would be occurring simultaneously in parallel to those green infrastructure suggestions?
Yeah, and so when this cost projects first started going and I found out what they were going to do, I was like, oh, great, they're going to solve Austin's compatibility problems. But I think that's the real rub. Where does the corridor start? Where does the corridor end? In kind of both directions, like they were saying. Well, one thing that's interesting is what surprised me is when we went through the process to create the North Shore Creek plan. One of the things we heard very strongly from folks was we don't want any canyons along Burnett Road. Right? Because that means like we don't want any 3, 4, 5-story buildings along Burnett Road. Like okay, but if you go in there right now, there's already 3-story apartment buildings inside North Shore Creek. There's 3-story office buildings in the interior of that neighborhood as well. So I think that issue is something we need help with.
There's also a difference between height and density, and that was something that we thought about as well, and that's included in the ADU chapter.
Next question.
Y'all have done some great work. I'm curious to hear how you see the small area planning efforts relating to the development of a new city code, and how does the planning process relate to the development of a code?
Well, I think we set that a bit up in the beginning of our presentation. I'm imagining this process a little bit, but I have some experience, working on from comprehensive plan to land use map to zoning in other cities. And I think that, in a perfect world, if everything could just stop and you could do the big plan, do the intermediate plan, and then map zoning, that would be amazing. We don't have that, development continues and growth continues. So there's no way to sort of be like, okay, everyone stop, and we're gonna figure out this at all different scales, talk to each other as we need to, and then keep building. My instinct to say oh, we should do district plans for the entire city before zoning happens, because, and I know that's not an option, I'm not suggesting that really, but so that we can, so that those two types of planning can talk in both directions and really get at the goals that Austin cares about. I think as much as that talking can happen, even though, a development code is happening sort of as small area planning is being developed, as the next steps for development code is happening, they have to just be talking to each other, and maybe the development code needs to be more flexible and updated more frequently to reflect the changes that are happening and the planning that's happening at the district scale. So a commitment to updating zoning and development code when more detailed district scale plans are made is imperative.
Sure. Now, I would just say it would be great to know what the regulatory tools are before we set off and start doing new small area plans in Austin. I know from a staff perspective, our mates somewhat terrified to go back out to the community after the last few years. I think one thing we've heard is there's a lot of fatigue in the community. You keep asking us this stuff, you keep studying us, you keep planning, you keep doing engagement, you keep doing data. I keep telling you the same things. When are you just going to go do something? So it's kind of a balance with with that. But we'll do the smaller plans. We'll come up with the future land use map for those areas. Hopefully we'll know some direction on what the regulatory toolbox and regulatory framework will be. But whatever it is, we'll use those zoning districts to implement the plans.
Too many questions.
So my name is Eli. I'm a freshman at UT. I was curious how this concept of small area planning fits in with places where residence is very short, like for instance West Campus. People only live there 3 years. It's not really something where there's as much civic engagement as say a neighborhood and somewhere else where there's a lot more civic engagement. So how does that work, I guess?
I mean, I'll one point to that, and then I'll let Matt speak because I'm sure that you have more of a local context for that, is that even if you are only going to live there for a few years, first of all, those few years matter, and your input is also representative of other people who are going to come later. So I would say that civic engagement and your opinion are still valuable to the city as long as you make yourself available to participate in the process. And then I would also say that if there's an area where there's high turnover because it's, you know, populated mostly by students or frequently by students, that's still representative of a condition that we can plan and prepare for.
I also just wanted to encourage you as a student to participate in planning efforts. It is really important and super powerful, and something every city wants is young people to be involved in what is happening in the city. You know, we were just students a few months ago. Our classmates did advocacy, including AIA, a lot of work to advocate for you know, issues that affected the campus, that then affected the neighborhoods around the campus that we lived in, including developing student housing that would lessen sort of the pressure of student housing on the surrounding neighborhoods. These are very real things that you can do and affect in a short time. So it's a little pitch for being involved as a student. I don't know if you have questions back
yeah, just building on what Natalie and Diane said is yeah, the students come and leave after 2 years or 4 years. The needs stay the same year after year after year for students. And so one thing I think in Austin we think of ourselves as really engaged civically, but our voter turnout numbers show something else. So one, vote, seriously vote, and then two, yeah, you know, make your voice heard. I was at a conference in Galveston last week, and this woman was talking about Bette Midler, and Bette Midler got involved in some sort of, I think, disaster recovery effort. I forget exactly what it was, but she goes around, she's listening to all the different disciplines talk and what they have to say. And then she goes over to the planners, she, you know, hey, as planners, it's like, you guys need to use your voice. You need to get loud, because you know how all this stuff fits together, but you're just kind of, you know, on the side. So I would, you know, just kind of repeat the same thing. As planners, as landscape architects, as architects, as students, you know, we need to get loud.
Question back here. Thank you. I'm pretty much just a concerned citizen. I see the big problems of affordability and then lack of mobility. Who is going to be responsible for, because it seems like in the past 15, 20 years, city council has been saying, well, the city does this, and then the city says, well, the city council voted on this. No one's really being accountable. So the responsibility and leadership of the people who have the positions, I see the plan that you're doing, and I see you're talking about not just from the top down, from the bottom up, but what entity is going to say that they're responsible for the outcomes if we continue to exacerbate the affordability problem and the lack of mobility problem that continues? What if the problems that we're talking about right now in 20 years are still going on? Who's going to be responsible for that, and what does your plan talk about that?
Yeah, affordability is a big concern in Austin and in a lot of places, and it's something that we considered very deeply. In terms of who's going to raise their hand and take responsibility for that, I am not a public official in Austin, and so I can't tell you who's going to do that in the future. But I can tell you that those kind of investments that will make affordability, that will prepare Austin for the issue of affordability, should be being made at all levels. You know, you need to have local citizens having a voice and voicing their needs to the top, and having a top-down investment in those needs. I can advocate for that, and in our role as sort of outside observers, we definitely did advocate for that, but unfortunately, I think affordability is a much bigger problem than we were able to tackle in the scope of this, beyond recommendations about the types of moves the city should make. Funding is a much longer conversation that I hope the city has.
I'll just say one, again, I think your question is awesome, you know, very real, present in this work, although not the direct focus. But I'll just say, like, when you say, you know, two entities of Austin government pointing to each other saying, oh, maybe they're in charge, I think the answer is that we're all responsible for that, and working, like, and Matt, you were talking about the difficulty of different parts of the city of Boston government working together. I think that the civic institution of Austin needs to get stronger and more accountable together. There are plenty of people here who can say way more about what's happening for this, but just wanted to say it's not about pointing fingers and saying the other person. It's about everyone together saying, no, all of us are responsible for it.
One last thing that I would say is that one of the comments that we got that really struck a chord with me was when we spoke to citizens from Northeast Austin, but similar sentiments were echoed in South First as well, that, big changes are coming to Austin, people would say, but we aren't going to be here to experience them. And that really upset me because I don't think that that's what anybody wants for the city. And so I guess I don't have a satisfying answer to that question because it's a much larger question, but I think it's in everybody's best interest to look for ways for the big changes that come to Austin to be for the people who currently live here. And that's something to ponder.
Question back here.
Hi, Matt Beaton, I'm an architect. Does the corridor, the small area planning effort that's going on right now with the corridors, is that going to kind of backtrack and influence the current corridor plans that are in effect that are being kind of designed based on the transportation bond effort?
Well, right now there's no corridor planning projects going on. There are the mobility bond projects that are going on, but those are two separate things. So the idea for us is, if the city is making investments in areas on corridors through the mobility bond, well, let's come in and try and match that land use to that area to try and leverage the investment the city's made. But we haven't started our part of it yet.
Question.
So the gentleman asked about the responsibility for the planning, really, and what happens. And I'm Greg Gertz, I'm your planning director. It really is important. It really is everybody. And I really appreciate the discussion that you had. And I know a lot of my planning commissioners are here about small area plans. And it's very much a challenge to keep continuing on the path that we have, because the neighborhood level plans that we have done, and there were, I think, close to 57 of them, Matt, that I think that covered the city, only netted about 26% of the entire city. And I've got people screaming elsewhere in the city that are experiencing a fantastic level of growth that you're not seeing in some of these neighborhoods. And they're kind of saying, what about us? And the point that was just made about those generational concerns, they're very hard to get younger people to come in. And we've got a lot of newer people coming in saying that there's not a place for me. And the challenge, I think, that we had in Imagine Austin, when we're talking about 750,000 people and 300,000 jobs coming, is where people are going to live. And that discussion, it's not just the code. It may be bonds. It may be other things that are out there that add to that, all kind of play up to and start including the affordability component, whether it's smaller lots or more density, whether it's in the same size structure or not. So there are a lot of challenges that are coming, and I think the district level perspective that you have are something about my staff is kind of looking at, and we're going to where the need is the most, where if Amazon were to land tomorrow, that would probably dictate that we probably need to do some planning in that area. At this time, we're hearing from Capital Metro. I think you're hearing a lot that are being discussed about our corridors, and that we need to plan along our corridors to accommodate that, because of some of the older neighborhoods aren't willing to accept a lot of the growth in those areas. They want to keep the character of what they have. That's what they bought into. I get that, but we have all these people still coming. We had 4% growth over 6 of the last 8 years, and people are still coming here. And as you may have heard today in the papers, we're running out of lots that are even affordable on the outskirts of Austin. So do you want those people in the service? Do you want the creative people to be able to still live in Austin? Or you want them to live in Bastrop and Elgin and try to commute in? And then that very much loses the character of Austin that I've enjoyed over the last 35 years living here.
Affordability isn't just housing as well. There's a lot of pieces that go into that. So I'm very happy that you're speaking to Cap Metro and other places, because, you know, even if you increase housing stock, you know, transportation, even the environmental systems that we spoke about, which help to mitigate risk of flooding and things, these all are part of an affordability picture. And without them working together, you know, you can build more housing stock, but if people can't get to and from work, that's not a viable or affordable option. So I'm happy to hear that you're thinking through that.
Question?
Yes, I'm a citizen, the public, and I am working on developing 7 acres in Austin. And one of the things we're looking at, and that I haven't heard you talk about, is in Austin growing, one of the biggest growing populations is the population over 65. And that is going to have huge influence over the next 30 years. Do you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share right now?
Yeah, so we, as you heard, we did a lot of sort of almost like canvassing as we were in Austin, and we made a lot of sort of contacts with people that we just engaged with our work in our project. And one of those individuals that we spoke with was a woman who she owned her home, and she owns her home. She's living kind of far south, down in a neighborhood off of South First Street, and it's become unaffordable for her to be there over time, with her tax burden and her income being not growing. Sorry for that lack of eloquency, but so she has actually, you know, has a roommate now, like a new roommate. So we're taught. That was something we heard a lot, is sort of how are people going to be able to age in place in the neighborhoods that they love in Austin. The ADU, that, you know, talking about incremental density. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, yeah. That sounds like, you know, as we know, aging populations have different like sets of needs about what communities look like and how they function. So it's not something we looked at directly in this work, but you're right, it's important to know who's coming in as quickly as we can and just make sure that they're incorporating our plans. Yeah, please.
In terms for the city perspective, we actually have an age-friendly action plan. And the thing that's interesting about that one is actually the city didn't do it. The outside organizations did it. So Austin Up and the AARP, they're the ones that came up with it, and they based it on, I think the World Health Organization has these 8 domains with creating an age-friendly action plan. They line up really well with the Imagine Austin Party programs. So now we actually have a interdepartmental team that's taken that age-friendly action plan to move it forward. Interim Assistant City Manager Sarah Hensley is the executive sponsor for that initiative, and it covers all those areas.
Question.
Talking about planning in the natural environment, you talk about planning in the built environment, but there's another environment that all planning takes place, and that's the political environment. And I find your notion of district very intriguing, and I think it has a lot of merit. But inevitably, those districts are going to go over places where there's adopted neighborhood plans, and those plans have a politically savvy, very much ingrained constituency who are not going to let go of them easily. So how would you move forward? What would you recommend to say, we need to come in and do these plans at a greater level, at the district level, and it's going to supersede these plans and they're going to go away? Because you can't have 2 levels of planning like that in the same place. So how might you recommend moving forward if that were to be something that the city were to pursue?
Yeah, that's a really big challenge. That's why we included a lot of public engagement strategies in our book, because it is going to take that kind of advocacy, convincing people, I think, doing the hard work of winning people over to this mindset that, you know, we're not a archipelago of different neighborhood plans that don't speak to one another. We have goals as a larger community at the scale of the district and at the scale of the city. We have to be thinking about those. And I think, you know, that's why public engagement is important. It's not only to gather people's input, but also to, you know, help people see beyond the needs that they might be most central to their mind. People, I think can generally think about density coming to Austin in our experience, in the abstract, and then, in the context of their personal, like parcel and neighborhood plan, and those two opinions can sometimes contradict. So that's why, that intermediate scale is necessary, but you do have to win people over and, buy people into the idea that intermediate scale represents a coming together of your local needs and your city's needs, and we all can get on board with that.
One other thought, I bet you have a comment about this. Okay. Well, I have a question, which is, it's possible that what Austin is actually planning doesn't overlap. I'm not sure. So, identifying where the locations of our overlap will be in the future are important. But I think, we're advocating for that to take place in our sites here. I think that we also should be honest with ourselves as a community. Like, how old are some of these neighborhood plans, and who are the people living in our communities now? They're different. And the people who have, wrote these plans and some of the goals and the character of those neighborhoods are why those new people moved there. And that's important to understand, but it's also important to be honest with ourselves as community members and say, like, okay, this was written in the 80s. Some people who are now trying to buy a house in this neighborhood weren't born yet. So, we just should be super direct and honest about sort of what is changing, like, who are we now? And who are my neighbors, and who are my future neighbors? So I'm just repeating the same point, but I think looking at age of plans is super important. And it's planning takes time, so they
it takes time, and it takes energy too. It's not easy to buy people into this whole new approach, but we have some ideas about how you can do it, and it does take that work.
I think it's important to think about too with the neighborhood plans. You can look at them and take cue of what was planned in those neighborhoods and what was important to them, what they valued in that time when it was written, and look at the neighborhood adjacent to them and look at the neighborhood adjacent to them and realize they're a community, and those neighborhood plans technically were drawn exclusively for each neighborhood, but if they actually came together and talked about a community as a whole, they'd probably have similar thinking in terms of what they want their district to be like. So it's not about wiping clean the neighborhood plans, it's about thinking larger than the neighborhood plans to the community scale. That's why we're here today. We're the future of community-based urban design. That's the title of this presentation. So the whole point is to engage more people and outside of your neighborhood, to cross over the street and realize, hey, this street is really important to both of our neighborhoods. Let's do something about it together and not my side of the street only. So.
Hi, I'm Lacey. I'm a planner with the city, and I just have a quick question for y'all. This district level 9 square mile kind of district level planning, is that something that we've seen other cities doing, or is this a new concept that you are using Austin as a guinea pig for?
It's definitely not a new concept that we're using Austin for a guinea pig for. I think it's a new concept in the field of planning that a lot of cities are beginning to look to as they are also experiencing kind of like growth and the challenges of growth. You have some experience. Small area plan.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do like a survey of the country to say like what other 9 square mile areas have been planned for in the country, but I think that would be really interesting, like to see what those are. But I do think that, going back to like a corridor, I'm not answering this question very well. I guess the answer is I don't have like a city that I can point you to, in my brain to say like, oh yes, like Milwaukee is doing this. But I'm sure that there are.
No, we did look at other cities that are doing variations of this.
Yeah, small area planning, of course, is not new, but you're talking about the scale at which the district. Yeah.
I think they're all at the same phase. So I think cities that are beginning to look at district area planning, at small area planning, are similar to Austin in that they have growth, they have local character, and I think the planning field in general is beginning to look to more intermediary solutions and scale.
I'm sure there are some. I think that this is something that is emerging, but I think there are also some. I just don't have like a list on it with my tongue. But.
Oh yeah, see the boards. Any new questions? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, I didn't mean to characterize. Oh, I really apologize. I did not mean to say that they're all sort of old documents at all.
In the event that they are old.
Yes. I really apologize for that implication. I know that a lot of people here have worked really hard on those plans, and that represents your community, so I'm really sorry. I think that, you know, the scale that we looked at, as you saw, are bigger even than the neighborhood plans that have already been made. So, you know, it would take, if you were playing at the scale of a neighborhood all the way down South First Street, that would be like 30 more plans before you get to a district scale. So I think that I'm, hopefully it's like,
Yeah, that might be an interesting process to begin to grow the constituency that falls within a new district. I like that.
I get the concept and the idea. I think what we bump into is something the audit pointed out is that not every area of the city is treated equitably for planning services. So you would give an area that already has a plan, another plan, and you have areas of the city that don't yet have a plan, and they still wouldn't be getting a plan.
Great. So we end here at, I believe you have this room till 3. My mic wasn't working earlier. So we will wrap up now and then come up here if you guys want to look at the boards and just ask more detailed questions to the students. They'll be up here. And also, I forgot to mention this book here we will have at a library. I want to say Central Library that you guys can rent out if you want a physical copy. But then again, please go onto our website. You can see it online. You can download it. Just want to thank again everyone involved. I want to thank again the students for the amazing amount of work. And thanks to you guys for coming today.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Justin.